Today we're going to look at 7 categories of exercises to practice every day, especially if you're around the intermediate level. One of the reasons I'm making this video is that I think a lot of guitarists end up settling into just maintenance exercises. They kind of stop doing improvement exercises and they just kind of play the same stuff or the same scales over and over, and they're really kind of maintaining their technique, but they aren't doing improvement work anymore. They're kind of just doing the same thing over and over and they get a little bit bored with it. Some people even just abandon their technique routine altogether, which is not a good idea. So part of this video is just about making sure that you're actually using your technique routine to improve, not just maintain your technique. Now, we've all seen videos online with titles like "The Only 7 Exercises That You'll Ever Need," or something similar to that. And I'm not here to criticize those videos. I'm sure the videos are very good and they're good exercises, but of course, it's quite a large exaggeration of what's required when you're practicing technique. There's a reason why good technique books, like Capel's book here, has hundreds of pages with hundreds, if not thousands, of exercises in them. Even my technique book opens with 100 open string exercises for just the right hand, followed by 120 Giuliani exercises, and that's before you even get to the left hand exercises. So there's hundreds of exercises in these books, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that books with hundreds of exercises prepare you for the endless variety of technique that occurs in repertoire. So technique prepares you for repertoire, and because the repertoire is endless in variation, we need lots of exercises to train our bodies and our fingers and our mind, the various different techniques of playing, so that when you go to play a new piece, you feel like, oh, I can play this because I've practiced such a variety of technique that I'm ready for this piece and whatever it might throw at me. And there's another reason too why big technique books and having hundreds of exercises is so important, because they can also lay things out in a progressive way. So progressive exercises can guide you from beginner levels to advanced levels. If you take a finger independence exercise, you can start with like a beginner one and then progress to an intermediate one and eventually progress to advanced ones. So it gives you a guided path towards success, not just a static exercise that you're going to practice forever. Let's now go over the 7 categories of technique exercises that you might cover if you're an intermediate student. And remember, of course, if you're a beginner student, you're going to probably leave out some of these categories. And if you're an advanced student, you're probably going to add a whole bunch more categories. So there's no right answer because everyone is so unique in their development and it's all very personal. So any video or any lesson that tries to tell you that these are the 7 categories or these are the exercises you have to play, again, that's an exaggeration. Everyone is so unique in their development that they must be addressing specific issues with their own playing. Even if you're following like an exam system with a curriculum, even then, I've never met a student that doesn't have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And even if you try to progress to the next level and you pass an exam of the previous level, that doesn't mean that you improved your slurs. They might still be weak. You might be improving them enough to pass an exam, but they might still be quite weak. You haven't actually addressed an issue yet. So that's a very important point. So first category, I often warm up with and study and with open string exercises for the right hand alone. This might be as simple as just kind of doing IM across the strings. Back up through the strings. Or you might be spicing that up a little bit. Maybe you do it in triplets, so the accent falls on a different finger. I am, I am, I am, I am, I am, I am. Or maybe you're spicing it up by doing a rest stroke on the first of each triplet group. So rest, free, free, 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 rest, free, free. Sometimes it's working on awkward string crossings. Playing M on the lower string and I on the higher string. And of course, going through all the different finger combinations, I am alternation, MA alternation, 3-finger alternation. That puts the accent on a different finger each time. So like A, M, I, A, M, I. There's so much that we can do with just the right hand. And the reason I do this is because I want one of my hands to be on automatic pilot a little bit, because I often will need to focus on my left hand more, and I want this hand to be super efficient and ready to address issues. It's also just like it's a little bit less satisfying to work on left hand alone because there's less sound, because there's no plucking. So like working on the right hand alone is very, very useful. It can just cover so much ground and just get you really focused on right hand issues, but also tone production, working on the sound that your hand is actually producing on those strings. And just right hand alone, getting rid of the distraction of the left hand and just putting the right hand to work. The second category I'll often work on is scales and melodic patterns. So, of course, scales, and sometimes the scales I'll introduce different rhythmic patterns. In order to increase the difficulty of the shifts, maybe, or just to check my technique and for weaknesses, and which I can then work on. Also with scales, sometimes it's just legato. Making sure it's not, maybe I can work on articulation in that way. I can work on staccato scales as well. Maybe sometimes it's dynamics. Doing a crescendo or something like that. It doesn't have to just be purely technical. It can be musicality as well. So scales and melodic patterns. I often warm up with a melodic pattern, which is just 1, 4, 3, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4, 3, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4, 3, 4, 2, 4. You get the idea. And I do that because it works the pinky finger a lot extra, the fourth finger. And if accuracy is an issue for your fourth finger, which it is for many students, exercises like that can be really great just for organizing that finger and getting it ready to go. And it's really easy to make these patterns more challenging. Like I was saying about the curved fingers, sometimes I'll check the curvature of my fingers by adding that open string below. And if my finger isn't curved enough, I'll mute that string by accident. So it's really easy to take melodic patterns and work on them. And also we should just play single lines more often and try to get them at a super high quality level. Violinists and flute players and things, like they will play single line material their whole life, and the quality level is just astronomically high, and guitarists could learn a lot from that. The third category, arpeggios and right hand patterns. Working on arpeggios, for me, sometimes I'll work on arpeggios in terms of speed. I'm pretty comfortable with my arpeggio patterns, like the 120 Giuliani exercises. Of course, I could work on speed and articulation with them. But I also just like to work on different things such as accent patterns. So for example, accenting the thumb. Then the I finger. Sorry. chord. Then the A finger. You know, it's just so like that's a personal thing that I work on for improvement purposes. I want to be able to bring certain notes out of a musical texture, and sometimes I find when I'm playing I get distracted and I'm not able to do that very naturally with my right hand. So working on that in a dedicated way during my arpeggios, for example, is another way I can take the practicing of arpeggios or right hand patterns and adding something to it for improvement purposes. Okay, the fourth category is slurs, so hammer-ons and pull-offs. This is an essential technique. It adds dexterity and opportunities for a light but directed reflex-oriented movement in your left hand. It's also one of those techniques that just simply needs to be maintained. And so you need to maintain it a lot because I find if I don't practice them regularly, they do degrade in quality. So I'll often do a sextuplet pattern. So where I just pluck it once, but play it numerous times. And the reason I do that is that I find it easier to hear the clarity of my hammer-ons and pull-offs when I'm not plucking it with the right hand. It's easier to tell what the left hand is doing with it on its own. And sometimes when I'm working on the improvement aspect of slurs, I'll do like fixed fingers and make sure that I can practice slur patterns with fixed fingers. And it's harder. My weakness would be like my third and fourth finger. When I have fixed fingers down, that's just not as comfortable. It's something that I need to work on in order to improve. So lots of ways to do that. The fifth category is finger independence exercises. These are great when you're first starting to practice finger independence exercises. I would say one of the things they do is they organize your left hand technique, and they also teach you a lot about your hand position on the guitar. It makes you maybe swing this knuckle in so you can get the fourth finger somewhere. It just, because it's utilizing all the fingers so equally, it teaches you a lot about your hand position and what's needed for more advanced repertoire. And quite often, like I said before, we can do these quite progressively. Sometimes they start by just simply like placing all the fingers down and just moving one finger back and forth, right? And you'd be surprised that some people, when all four fingers are down, they look at their hand and they can't move one of their fingers very well. They just don't have that actual independence in a finger. So endless exercises in that regard, and very good to do. The sixth category is bar exercises, and so many people leave bar exercises out of their technique routine, and I understand why. It's because people hate them. They hate bars. That bothers them. That bothers their hand. It hurts their hand. They get upset. It's very demoralizing. But the thing is that well, for one thing, whenever someone complains that their bar technique's bad, I always ask them. The first thing I ask them is, do you practice it in your technique routine? And the answer is quite often, inevitably, no. No, I don't practice it regularly. The great thing about practicing bar exercises is that instead of working on your bar chord in your repertoire for like half an hour where there's tons of bars that you have to do, in a technique exercise, you might only do it for 30 seconds, which means it actually reduces the potential for injury on your hand. If you only do something for 30 seconds, the potential for injury is much less. But if you do it every day, you'll be making sure you either improve the technique or maintain it at least. And, some bar exercises are designed to not hurt your hand. So maybe it's an on-off thing. So where you do the bar, release, 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 release. And then other ones maybe are a little bit more strenuous, but they cover all the situations of the fingers playing on different strings while doing a bar. But like, how long did those 2 exercises take? 30 seconds? Like, super quick. And you can do a couple of retries for adjustment and making sure you're close to the frets and things like that. But it's just so important that you actually practice your bars, because how are you supposed to get better at them? If you try to get better at them during your piece, it's going to hurt your hand, because usually you're doing something weird while you're doing that. You're not actually in the frame of mind to be relaxed. So just including bar exercises is so important. And for beginners, sometimes when I teach a beginner a bar exercise, it's just like, put your finger on the string and strum it, and don't even push down. Just get used to putting your finger straight up and down, not at an angle, but straight up and down, and don't even push though. You know, like, people think that bar chords are always hard, there's no easy exercises, but there are. I will teach beginners to do bars like this. And then maybe after a week of them just doing that on each fret, I'll check them, and if it looks like the finger isn't like misaligned or something, there actually looks pretty good, then I'll start to get them to do like a little exercise where they actually push the string down, but not before then. So there's lots of progression that we can add there. Could talk about that for a long time. Category number 7 is horizontal and vertical stretch exercises. And again, you want to be careful with these. This is another occurrence where practicing something for 30 seconds is much wiser than binging on it at some point in the future, because there's such a potential for injury here. And of course, this is more for the intermediate students. I often don't have beginner students do any stretch exercises at all. They're mainly doing alignment exercises and just getting their hand position in order before we even go anywhere near something that would be a stretch. Same thing with the bar exercises. Beginners generally don't have to do that yet until their guitar and hand positions are really solid. So horizontal, stretches, quite often I'll do like just a basic like stretch between each of the fingers. And when I'm working with a student, first I'll just, then the stretch between these 2 fingers. And you'll find actually that when you get up to the highest string, it's actually much harder. Now the stretch is between 3 and 4. When I start these with students, we will start way up at the 7th fret, where the frets are closer together. That makes the stretch easier. And so maybe we do a week of the stretch exercise up here. And then if it looks good after a week, then we'll go to the 6th fret and do it there for another week. And eventually they get down to the 1st fret, but then they've had 7 or 8 weeks to adjust to it and to gradually get more used to it and to solve maybe some issues with their technique or their positioning that makes stretches more possible. And so, it's very, very important that when we look at any of these categories that we work in a progressive way. Those videos that tell you, here's a stretch exercise, go practice it, it'll make you better. They're really not taking into account like the possibility of injury or the idea of progressing through an exercise in order to build a foundation and then build upon that foundation and improve. They're kind of just throwing an exercise that might be very useful, but for a lot of students, it might not help them. It might injure them, or it might just be just not optimal. It's just like, it's not an optimal way to practice, and it's not going to make you happy. It might make you quite unhappy. So making sure that you do it in a progressive way is so important. Vertical exercises, same basic idea. Maybe it's like testing the stretch between the different strings. And maybe when, you're starting out with this kind of exercise, you start with just 2 strings that are adjacent. And then you progress to, the 3rd and 1st string. And then you do the 4th and 1st string. Even that, my technique there, I was like, I collapsed a finger and wasn't curving my finger. And then as you progress to the, more challenging ones, you learn a lot about your technique. But again, a progressive nature really helps. Okay, now the final thing I want to talk about, those are the 7 categories. And I feel like those are the 7 categories that I consider intermediate students they need to cover those 7 categories. Like that's the meat and potatoes of guitar playing, and the intermediate player needs to go over all 7 of those categories. But of course, the secret to building a good technique routine is actually looking beyond that. This is like, these are 7 categories that are like an essentials guide. But for you personally, you might either need to put more categories in there for one of 2 different reasons, or both. Maybe you need to add more categories in there because you're becoming more advanced. So you need to start adding other types of auxiliary techniques, whether that be like sweeping techniques or harmonics, or like making sure you are mapping out your harmonics and that technique. Maybe it's more complicated fixed finger exercises with combining different techniques together, because you're getting more advanced. Or you need to add more categories in there because you have very unique and personal technique development issues that you need to address. And so the idea that we would have like 7 exercises that we can practice forever and it's all you need, that's a tough one. That's kind of ridiculous. Everyone is so unique. They need to be really addressing certain things in their playing. And so, of course, we expand on this. But if we have these 7 as like a goal, if we can just do a little tiny bit from each of these categories, maybe we only have a 10-minute technique routine, but if we can get in a little bit from each of these categories, then we know like, okay, I'm covering some good stuff for an intermediate student. Then you just add some extras on there if you're getting more advanced, or if you need to improve in areas outside of the categories. You can also decide to put more effort into certain categories than other ones. If your scales are like just poor, then maybe you dedicate more time to your scales. Or maybe if you have remember that exercise I was talking about where you do a rest stroke followed by free stroke? A lot of students have a trouble with that, and they realize that their rest stroke and free stroke technique are so different that they change their hand position each time. But you can tell when I'm doing it, rest, free, free, rest, free, free, rest, free, free, that my technique doesn't change much for the 2 different strokes. And so I've got that somewhat under control. I still work on it, but you can decide my rest stroke and free stroke abilities are going to be something that I'm actually going to create a separate category for. I'm going to say my 8th category is rest stroke and free stroke alternation, and combining those so that they're a little bit more similar, and that my technique doesn't do rapid hand changes, which is impractical sometimes. So if you're interested, my technique book does have numerous technique routines for different levels, early intermediate, late intermediate, or absolute beginner, or mid beginner, late beginner. Time management is always an issue that everyone needs to address, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. As long as you're getting a few exercises in each of your categories, you're doing really well, because you're addressing those different categories, and you're not avoiding them. So whether your time frame is 10 minutes or an hour of technique, whatever suits your lifestyle, and your practice lifestyle, that's fine. But thinking in terms of categories will help you just keep your playing a little bit more organized. And also thinking about maintenance versus improvement will make sure that you don't plateau and just stick with maintenance exercises forever. You know, you want to keep on improving all the time, whether it's by small increments or big leaps. It doesn't matter, but you always want to be moving forward and keeping a positive frame of mind. And I think that people that practice in this way do have a more positive frame of mind on all this, because they're just a little bit more level-headed that like, oh, if I need to improve something, I need to find exercises for improvement versus just maintenance. And they can kind of see like the problem and the solution, and they can get to work on it. So I hope you found that a little bit useful. This is just an introductory discussion on it. We could talk about it for hours, but nevertheless, it gives you an idea of how you might view your technique sessions.